Hello, my name is Meredith Gibbons, a professional development associate here at NACE. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Path to Early Talent, How Industry-Leading Organizations Are Transforming Early Talent Acquisition. It is my pleasure to introduce Caitlin MacGregor, CEO and co-founder of Plum, Doug Holland, Global Talent Management Vice President of the Whirlpool Corporation, James Spearing, Global Talent Acquisition Vice President at Scotiabank, and Etienne Vasquez, Head of Entry Business Recruitment for Americas at Bloomberg. Take it away.
All right, thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. And so we're going to kick things off with allowing each of our panelists to introduce themselves, telling us a bit about their role at their organization. So James, do you want to kick things off?
Okay, sure. Thanks, Caitlin. Hello to everyone. My name's James Spearing. As was mentioned earlier, I'm the VP of Global Talent Acquisition at Scotiabank. For those of you on the line who might not know Scotiabank, because I know we have participants from different countries, I'm based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and Scotiabank is the third largest bank in Canada. We do have a global footprint, but for my US friends on the line, you might not know our brand because in the US, we're a capital markets bank and corporate function, so we don't serve retail customers. But I've been in role for just coming up on 3 years in December, and I'm responsible for all entry points for talent acquisition from campus or early talent all the way up to executive TA, from contingent workers through to full-time, and also representing the countries that we have a geographical footprint. So thrilled to be here today with the panelists and with Caitlin. So I'll pass it back to you, Caitlin.
Thank you. Doug, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Caitlin. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. It's great seeing everyone kind of, sort of calling out where they are dialing in from, all the great colleges and universities and other companies. So thank you for joining. I'm Doug Holland. I'm the VP of Talent Management for the Whirlpool Corporation. And I have responsibility for things like talent acquisition, learning, leadership development, talent assessment, succession planning, et cetera. I've been in this role for about 4 years, and I hope you all know the Whirlpool Corporation, but we are the owners of great global appliance brands like Whirlpool, like Maytag, like KitchenAid, like JennAir. So very happy to be here and look forward to our discussion today.
Perfect. And Etienne, you're next.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Etienne Vasquez, and I lead entry-level business recruitment for the Americas region at Bloomberg. So Bloomberg is a global financial data software company, and Scotiabank, fantastic client of ours. In terms of my role and responsibilities, I've been at Bloomberg for almost 11 years now. First 8 on the business side and the last 3 in recruitment. I currently lead sort of 3 functions within the entry space. One, our diversity recruitment. So that's schools, programs, as well as early engagement. We run our internship program and full-time. We hire everything across the company that is entry and business. So that means non-engineering. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And so my name is Caitlin MacGregor. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plum. And I'm going to give you a very quick overview of what we do because each of our panelists are going to talk about how they've implemented Plum and the type of change that they have created. So basically, Plum at its core is trying to democratize access to highly predictive data that's 4 times more accurate than a resume at predicting on-the-job success. And we do that by taking best science from industrial organizational psychology and combining this with technology in order for it to create a positive user experience and to allow it to scale. And so some people might be familiar with outdated assessments that they maybe take a different assessment per role. With Plum, we've really been able to create a single assessment that a candidate completes in order to really represent who they are, who their natural talents are, what makes them exceptional at being in the job, and really gets to the core of where they get a sense of self-worth and what they would best be aligned to do that would make them happy, fulfilled, and allow them to thrive, which results in better performance and better retention. And so the way this works is our first step is this candidate assessment. Employees can take it too. It's the same one-time assessment. It takes on average 20 to 25 minutes. It's untimed. We'll actually give you the opportunity to complete your assessment at the end of this webinar. And in response, as soon as they're done taking this assessment, they immediately see their Plum profile, which talks about their top 3 talents. So this small icon here talks about how this person's top talent is adaptation, innovation, execution. It even gives them interview questions they can ask on the job to make sure that they'd be happy in the role. And when somebody becomes an employee, we even go even deeper and give them a full professional development guide. So this single assessment really gives them a representation of who they are and what they're capable of doing if just given the opportunity. The second step is that employers like Bloomberg and Scotiabank and Whirlpool, in just 8 minutes, they're able to quantify the behavioral needs of a job. And they do that by having the different job experts, so the HR business partners, the hiring manager's boss, maybe a couple of top performers, basically 3 to 8 internal job experts in 8 minutes narrow down which behaviors are most important for the job. And so in this case, it's really small, but you could say innovation was the most important, and then communication, and then execution. And then the third step is that we're able to match every single candidate to every single job that has completed this 8-minute job analysis, creating a match score. So we might have somebody like Maya, who the job she applied to, she's only a 40 match, but the company is able to see that she's a 95 for a job she didn't even think about applying to. Or somebody that, doesn't really have the background, has a 95, and now maybe they're being screened in, and the recruiter's taking time to see people that they never would have looked at before. And that's really Plum's goal, is to be able to screen in people that are going to perform at the highest level and stay the longest, based not what they've done in the past, but based on what they could do if just given the opportunity. So now you have a high level of what Plum is. At the end, you'll get a chance to complete your own Plum profile. And now I'm going to hand it back to the panelists to really talk about what was the challenge or problem at their organization that they were trying to solve when they started considering taking an approach beyond the traditional way that we've been hiring for the last 20 years. And so maybe Doug, can you kick us off in terms of what was your challenge?
Yeah, sure, Caitlin. So I think our challenge or our goal was sort of in 2 areas. And the first one was in candidate quality. New hire quality, right? We want to hire high performers. We want to hire people that are going to fit at Whirlpool Corporation. We want to hire people that are going to stay at Whirlpool Corporation. So as an IO psychologist, I was very focused on that. To be honest, I was very focused on validity, on an assessment tool that was going to actually predict performance once we hire the candidate. Because we're struggling on that front, particularly in the university recruiting setting. So that was, I would say, first and foremost. So when we were talking to Plum and others, frankly, early on in this process, I was very, very focused on an assessment tool that worked, that was going to produce results. So I'd say that was kind of number one. Number two was I'd say more on the efficiency side. So we get, across Whirlpool, across all our jobs, we get hundreds of thousands of job applicants. And, we have a small team of extremely hardworking recruiters and team members who are doing everything they can to try to hire fast and to hire high quality candidates. So I was really looking for something that was going to, provide some relief so that they can spend more time talking to the candidates that we know are sort of predisposed to fit within the Whirlpool Corporation. So those were kind of our 2 main criteria that we looked at.
That's great. Thank you. James, do you want to talk about the problem you were trying to solve?
Sure. So thanks, Caitlin. And so many of the same elements that Doug just touched on, I'd say, as we look at things. But for context, at Scotiabank, we started working with Plum a few years ago. And as of the fall of 2020, we went resumeless for campus and early entry talent in all of our Canadian-based entry points across all business lines. So that was a big move for us in terms of resumeless. And sort of why did we do it? Part of it for us, I won't repeat anything Doug had said in terms of the quality and the efficiency, but the efficiency was really key for us because in Canada, we are a well-known brand, so we are receiving a lot of applicants. So really what it sort of draws down for me from sort of the bigger piece that we were looking at was the Scotiabank purpose is for every future. And so for me and my colleagues in TA, and then working with Caitlin and the team at Plum, it was looking at, okay, look, we talk about for every future, but are we really providing that opportunity for really everyone? We traditionally recruited from many different universities across the country, but we've expanded the reach in terms of different colleges, universities, educational institutions, because we really wanted to open up the aperture and be able to get candidates for all of our different entry points, from as diverse an entry point as a frontline investment banker to a global operations support role in the different area of the bank. Also, we were focused on candidate experience and also a tech-enabled process that was really slick. And Caitlin touched on some of that in terms of the give back to the candidates. It's really beneficial for them to receive different reports, learn about themselves, whether they land a role with us or not. So those were some of the elements we were looking at, and also to be able to scale and adapt. So, we're just only 2 and a bit years on our journey with Plum, but, it's just the beginning for us.
Thank you. And Etienne, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Doug and James have commented on a couple of the areas that we were concerned with. I think when we think about hiring for entry level, which is where I spend a lot of my time, what we focus on or what some of the challenges are is not having experience. So how do we look for potential in a more scientific way? And that's kind of what Plum helped us to do. It's not what has this person done. I love how sort of Doug framed that. It's really what could this person do in the future, and it's hard to articulate that, but Plum helps us to articulate that. And by getting business buy-in on the competencies and the framework, it really helps to make that process of hiring for potential a bit more scientific. So that was number one. And two, there's the efficiency piece, which is identifying and also prioritizing the talent against those skills at a much quicker and much, again, more precise way, which allows us, again, to keep things moving, number one. So there's that, but also to manage volume while focusing on the best talent, the talent that is best fit for the roles that we have. So that was really what we were looking for, and certainly what we're seeing, and which echoes a little bit, of course, what Doug and James have brought up so far.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Do you want to just keep going and talk a bit about some of the results? What are the outcomes? How's the experience been at Bloomberg since implementing this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our experience has been incredibly positive so far. I think we brought on 2 major businesses and working on a third right now to expand the full capabilities of the platform. What the data is showing us, number one, is that we've done a few studies to validate, hey, if we had gone on and looked at hiring these people, would we have missed any? That whole what we call the diamond in the rough concept, and going through those exercises, we realized actually we're doing really well. Everybody who is passing Plum and working through that are people that we would have hired and who are performing well. So that the data supports that having it in place is going really well so far. One of the observations that's been great is by having the data, we've actually gotten even greater business buy-in on the things that we're trying to do around expanding the candidate pool we're looking at. So diversity has obviously been a huge push. It's been something we've been working on at Bloomberg, historically, but something we're obviously emphasizing now. And having Plum has actually helped us to further some of those arguments by saying we have something in place that is going to get us talent that aligns with what you're looking for. And so we can actually widen the scope of how we look for candidates because we have something safe in place that you believe in. And so the data has supported that as well. And so at least from initial observations, it's something I've been most excited, one, with the quality of the candidate, but two, the way that the businesses have engaged in the process, the buy-in, and how that's helped us to be more exploratory in our interview processes and our sourcing.
That's fantastic. Just for a bit of context, Bloomberg is actually one of our oldest clients. It's been over 4 years that we've been working together. So there's a really good base of data. Some of the other things in terms of results that I often talk to other people about is they always ask about adverse impact. which is a term in industrial organizational psychology, but basically is, there's always this fear that with assessments, especially since a lot of assessments on the market were designed in World War II, is it potentially screening out people or not including people that are not neurodiverse, or, was it only developed for, a North American audience? So is it, excluding people from other backgrounds? And one of the great things that Bloomberg's been really committed to is they run their own independent adverse impact study. And so for years now, it constantly comes back, and you deploy this globally. So you're able to compare for, global populations. Is this excluding anybody, or, having an unintentional negative impact on any groups? And year after year, it keeps coming back. Our own results plus yours are constantly in a line saying there is no adverse impact with Plum. And I love it because one of the things that we see is how it supports not all one size fits all. It allows for flexibility for needs of different organizations while still being incredibly inclusive. So we'll come back to lessons learned.
I'm glad you brought that back. Yeah, glad you brought that up. Yeah.
We'll move on to Doug. Do you want to tell us about some of the outcomes and experience of implementing Plum?
Yeah, sure, Caitlin. So we started using Plum in June of 2020, and we first started using it for our interns in our leadership development program. So people come in as an intern, they spend 3 months as an intern, and then those that we want to hire get full-time job offers to then return to Whirlpool as a full-time employee the following year after they finish school. So we actually administered the Plum assessment for that 2020 summer intern class, did not use it to screen anybody out. So we didn't look at the scores or anything like that. We hired those people in that we wanted to hire, and ended up doing a validation study with this group where we collected data on their performance at Whirlpool. So they do a lot of presentations. They have a people leader who does a formal performance assessment of them. And then we make job offers to those that we want to come back to us and join, as a full-time Whirlpool employee. And we found very strong correlations between the Plum match score and those that did well at our company, as well as those that we wanted to give full-time job offers too. And we didn't look at their Plum scores to determine, should we give them a full-time job offer or not. It was truly sort of a blind study, if you will. And then we did that the following year as well. So we had a second sample now of another class and found essentially the same exact thing. So there's a strong relationship between the Plum match score and how you do, at our company, and whether you're going to be successful. So that's what really kind of clinched it for me. And I think we may talk more about this later, but when you start to then have these conversations within your company to leaders, et cetera, that's what really makes an impact. And that's what really makes them want to then, use something like this. When it yields bottom line impact, right? When you can be confident in saying, hey, when we use this to hire people who score higher on this assessment, you're going to have a stronger team. You're going to have people that are going to perform higher, right? That is when you start to get the ball rolling and you start to, really generate a lot of interest. And that's exactly what happened here. Now we use it in other parts of the company, beyond just university hiring. And all the while, to kind of build on Caitlin's point earlier, we also look at adverse impact as well. And we didn't find any adverse impact at all. The other thing that I wanted to mention is something unique that we did with the Plum assessment in the summer of 2020. Now, this was COVID. This was early in the, we did remote internships for the first time ever, which was new, right? Because no one was in the office, et cetera. And we used the Plum assessment to bring everybody into a group to essentially meet each other and talk about who they are, what they're strong at. So we use the actual tool as a way to kind of learn about each person's strengths and talents, et cetera. So that wasn't intended. We don't use it for that purpose now, but in this particular situation, which was, obviously unique, it kind of had this, additional plus factor that was actually nice.
Fantastic. James, do you want to tell us about your experience using Plum and the results that Scotiabank's seen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say, I mean, it's so great to hear, others on the line from different organizations talk about where they've bent and stretched and learned, because our journeys are all a little different. And so some of the areas you've already moved ahead on with Whirlpool and Bloomberg are areas we're looking at. But in terms of impact and the results here, Doug talked about the bottom line impact. I'm an accountant by training who now works in HR. So the concept of transferable skills is very near and dear to my heart in terms of the role I have now. And this is one of the elements that Plum looks at, but also from an ROI perspective, one of the things we're really proud of is partnering with Plum to look at that bottom line impact really from a retention perspective. So we're using it from a talent acquisition point of view, but in terms of the quality of hire and the alignment into the roles, we're seeing such great impact. We're doubling our retention, and that's a result of the hires we're bringing in, and then also other strategies we're doing around our entry points. But a couple things I'd comment in terms of the other areas of impact or the results. One is, we haven't done a full study on adverse impact, but we're very comfortable when we look at the stats and everything. But this is something we'll be doing as we continue to build with Plum. But one of the things I wanted to make really clear for those on the line, because I know we'll have a lot of people from career centers and in, colleges and universities or educational institutions, is Plum is one part of our process. We did get away with resumes, and we have different elements of how we touch base with students and get to know them. But I wanted everyone to know that we do understand that certain universities have different criteria to get in, and so those great students from those traditional tier 1 schools, they're still getting the roles. It's just now this is additive for us. So that's one of the benefits, is we're stretching into more and more schools and universities. So we're going to be sort of, the US is a lot bigger than Canada, but we're up into sort of 33 to 35 schools now in Canada, and we'll continue to expand. So that will help. The other piece for us in terms of impact was our journey with Plum and our look at hiring on potential wasn't a diversity and inclusion play, but naturally, as we've been able to open up and get diversity of thought and give opportunities to people that either never thought they could work at the bank or never had the opportunity, or there was barriers, we're seeing the natural or sort of the numbers from a diversity perspective in terms of what we measure being rapidly increased. So we're federally regulated in Canada, so we have to monitor all equity deserving groups, and we report on that publicly. But with our journey with Plum and in terms of from a DE&I perspective, over 60% of our hires are visible minorities. So we're representing the Canadian population. Caitlin knows that, I like a goal, but I want to continue to stretch that, because we want to make sure that as we're bringing people into the organization, we're maybe addressing some of those gaps that we have at more senior levels. We're also seeing, we have different pledges or goals out in publicly around these representation stats. We have over 50% women in all of our programs, including those that maybe traditionally were more skewed towards the male gender. And so looking there, across our technology entry points, which are traditionally some of the harder ones, engineering and things like that. So we're really proud of that. And the other pieces in terms of impact is part of our ongoing journey. One of the great things we found working with Plum is it's not just a once and done. We're evolving. They're evolving their product roadmap and keeping pace with us as we have new initiatives in the bank and for our organization. So as I mentioned, we've been in the market with Plum for a couple of years now, and it's been in the last 6 to 9 months that our teams have partnered in terms of what we've called internally match criteria 2.0. So Caitlin talked about that 3-step process, which is really easy, very simple to implement. But through our recent work is we've ended up with better results as a result, or as an impact from us changing our approach and refining some of those match criteria as we've learned. So that's been something that I did want to tie into sort of the results piece, because we're evolving, but it is impacting us more and more. And so that's, and then the final point I'd make, which is actually normally where I start when I talk about this, is the thing for me that has been so powerful, not just for me as a leader in TA, my recruiters, my sourcers, or anyone else involved, but is seeing the mindset shift of the hiring managers and the leaders at the bank. We're not using this across the board for all of our entry points in terms of experienced hire, but those leaders are looking at talent holistically. So we are seeing that change in mindset in terms of how they look at talent, looking at those sort of traditional, non-traditional profiles or whatever words you want to use. So has a lot of power for my team to feel like they're making an impact, and the leaders to know that this just doesn't relate to their co-op intern or full-time hires off campus. These are elements in terms of the mindset and our approach to talent that's changing. So it's quite an exciting sort of cultural change, I guess.
Yeah, in terms of screening in people from different backgrounds, I know that at the bank, traditionally, they would go after finance and business backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so what would happen is you're going after the same elite schools, same finance and business graduates, and you're competing for that small pool of talent with all the other banks and consulting firms. And now, when you guys are now screening in from 33 plus colleges and universities, 40% of your hires now have STEM and arts backgrounds. And so very much moving into different backgrounds than before, and increasing those diversity numbers. So that's definitely great to hear. You touched on the match criteria for a second, so I'm going to go a little off script because I think this is a bit about, the outcomes of it. One of the things that the audience doesn't realize is that a lot of the times, when we think about assessments, it's often we're going to pull an accounting assessment off the shelf, or somebody that's going to go into sales. Here's a sales assessment, or, here's an operations assessment or a finance assessment. And with Plum, that first step is the individual is just completing this assessment once. They don't have to retake it. So if they wanted to apply to Bloomberg, to Whirlpool, and to Scotiabank, that candidate only has to complete one Plum profile. But when each of you then matches towards your roles, you're not all using the same match criteria. The match criteria in just 8 minutes is customized to what is actually needed for that unique role at that unique time, and even what we expected from people 3 years ago, or in the middle of COVID, or now, it's constantly evolving. We hear from our enterprise customers that roles are changing as quickly as every 6 months. So it allows you the opportunity in just 8 minutes to update and refresh what is it specifically that we're looking for in order for success. I remember when we deployed this with Bloomberg, that we actually found out that a data analyst position in Japan actually had different behavioral requirements for success than a data analyst in San Francisco. And it gives you that granularity to have different match criteria if you want it, or if you're looking at company-wide, trying to understand, what is it that you want people to have in terms of, major priorities. So it gives you that flexibility to get as granular as you want, or as high level as you want, and to be updating it as often as your business objectives are changing. There is no one size fits all. I often like to compare it to KPIs, key performance indicators. I think in the business world, we all understand that it's important to set key performance indicators to say, what do we need somebody to, perform against? What are we going to measure them on? What do we need them to do in order to be successful in the role? And we know that we don't borrow our KPIs from our competitors, and we don't borrow KPIs from 5 years ago. It's really important they're always to be refreshed. And that's really what that match criteria is it's narrowing down on those key behavioral indicators, those KBIs, but each of you have different KBIs than one another, and it allows for that. So somebody might apply to be a data analyst at Scotiabank and be a 40 match, and they may apply to be a data analyst at Bloomberg and be a 95 match. So it really allows you to tailor to your unique needs. But across the board, you're all seeing that increase in diversity. You're seeing that increase in performance and that increase in retention. And that's what's so great. All right, so I want to move on to any lessons learned from this implementation. If anybody wants to do this in their organization, how do they get better success, based on all the lessons learned from each of you? So Doug, maybe we can start with you in terms of any lessons learned.
Yeah, I would just say, I guess one thing, like I previously mentioned, just I was very, very wanting to establish the business case with the organization. And so, just leveraging, and I'll tell you, we did a pretty heavy diligence process, and we actually went down the path of a pilot with a different assessment company, and essentially found that it didn't predict performance. So, all of the data that I mentioned earlier, we didn't see a correlation between scores on the assessment and how the person did. So quickly moved away there. So really kind of dug in. So I guess if you're thinking about doing something like this, I think some of the key steps would be, do your research, make sure that your partner, with an organization that's established, that has science, validity, is thinking about things like adverse impact, because there's a lot out there that just isn't, that's not good science. So that's number one. I think number two is, we have learned a lot of lessons and continue to, with just how do you incorporate something like this in a large, complex global company like the Whirlpool Corporation. And I think having that strong partnership with your talent acquisition team, with the recruiters, with those who are going to be using the assessment, it's a part of their process that they're using day in and day out to hire people. So as we look to now expand, it's really getting that feedback early on in terms of really understanding the impact of sort of inserting this into an existing, sort of talent acquisition process, just to make sure that it's smooth, that people understand it, and that they can really articulate that to the organization, when we're sourcing, when we're providing candidate slates, et cetera. So those are sort of the two things that I would call out.
I want to just add one thing that really stood out with me in terms of your perspective on this, was that you told me about how important candidate experience was specifically to Whirlpool, because even if they don't get a job at Whirlpool, they still will have many opportunities to buy your products, and you want to have that positive brand experience. And one of the things that I love seeing is, if anybody goes onto LinkedIn and looks up Plum Top Talents, you will see that candidates every hour are thanking employers like Whirlpool, like Scotiabank, like Bloomberg, for the opportunity to learn more about themselves and to promote what makes them exceptional. And that just really goes to, really making sure that you're not just making sure the candidate is happy, but that future consumer of your brand is also happy. And that was just really blows me away. And I think it's an important part when you're trying to get that buy-in to higher levels of management, recognizing that it's not just this one position, it is that experience in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've got a just under 90% completion rate, which is, I think it's about 8 points higher than the industry. And, and I think part of that is because, well, hopefully it's the Whirlpool brand. People want to, work here, but, as Caitlin mentioned, they get something back, right? And that's unique. There's a lot of processes out there, a lot of selection processes, et cetera, tools out there where you complete an assessment and then you like go into a black hole, right? You never hear anything, no feedback. The Plum assessment gives every person who completes it a report that tells them, hey, here are what you're really strong at. These are the things that you should be looking at. These are the things that are really going to help you grow and be successwell. And that is, I think we got great feedback on that. We do get great feedback on that, as well, because as Caitlin mentioned, we want all candidates to be consumers. We want them to, be, Whirlpool, consumers. And I think the last thing I would say is, we don't use this as a screen out. Someone mentioned earlier, screen in. Like, most people who complete the assessment for us move on to the next step. This isn't about, you've got to attain some, Uber score that, nobody can attain. This is to just make sure that we feel pretty confident that this person has the basic talents, the basic skills, the things that we look for, that we know are going to make them successful and happy at Whirlpool.
Perfect. Thank you so much. James, do you want to share kind of some of the lessons learned from Scotiabank?
Sure. Yeah. So for us, so many lessons learned, and we continue to evolve, as I've indicated a few times, is one of the pieces, and some of this I think will be fairly obvious for any process, but, very, very true to our experience with using Plum in our current application, is just being clear on the objective we're looking to do. So Doug was commenting on this in terms of the screening in. That's been really clear, really key for us. So one piece is the when and the how and the process. So in that, we use Plum right up front for our campus hires. As we look at other areas where we might be using Plum, we may or may not use it in the exact same way in terms of the front end. It might be a little different, but one of the reasons why it's so powerful for us in the front end from a campus and early talent perspective is similar to my friends on the line. We're hiring students in just so many different areas of the bank. And so there's areas where students will naturally know, okay, that's where my degree will take me, or that's the logical path for me. But there's two things that I'd comment on. One is we have students who maybe don't go to those schools that are as sophisticated, or they haven't had the same opportunities. So they might not be in a program that directly aligns. So they need a bit of support to help understand, okay, where can I fit into the bank? And so that helps them from a sort of their background perspective. But then the other piece is, as Caitlin was mentioning, in terms of other organizations and what might be a great match score for Scotiabank might not be for others. So what also happens is we'll get people that apply to roles, and they may or may not really understand what that role entails, or the roles that would really align to them in terms of, you know, them thriving in the role and doing great things. So we do move applicants around. So they might apply to different areas of the bank, but also what we'll look at is, okay, if it wasn't in this area, is that person potentially really strong? And it is more conversations my recruiters are having, but they love that, right? Dealing with students and dealing with talents. The other things in terms of lessons learned, I'd say, is always to be customizing and adapting. So, you know, when we're working with Plum, as I mentioned, they want to know what our business opportunities are, what's changing, how can they continue to evolve their product roadmap, either for Scotiabank or more broadly. So I think that's really important. You know, the area of talent and talent assessments isn't static, right? It's continuing to move, as many on the line will know. The other pieces from a lessons learned is change management never ends, right? So, you know, we've got this implemented, we have the success, so the leaders are bought in. However, now we continually need to re-educate because we have different leaders or different people in the mix. So that will always be there. But you know, it's something the team loves, and that will be my final point is, as talent acquisition leaders or talent leaders, you know, our teams are very important to us, you know, and we want to make sure they're thriving themselves, they're enjoying their roles, they're doing innovative and new things. And I get so much enjoyment when I see my campus team and the early talent team engaging on new innovative ways of finding talent. You know, they get inspired by the diversity and inclusion aspects of it, but then also for them as professionals, you know, as Caitlin was saying, you know, there's other assessments out there, and some are, you know, as you were saying, Caitlin, from World War II. I've used some others that I say, look, I want to get out of the 80s. But, you know, this is really great for them, for their resumes, for their experience, and for them to continue to grow as professionals. So many lessons learned, very positive, you know, and I would say, you know, not every conversation in terms of change management is easy, but I think all of us will know that, you know, that's, you know, in my case, there's different areas of the bank where we have had to prove things in different ways, and getting those leaders aligned has been, you know, in some cases a very quick conversation, others it's an evolution, but you know, we get them there and we want to make sure we continue to evolve, but that's up to us to continue to show that we're moving the dial and doing great things and not staying static, as I mentioned.
Fantastic. And Etienne, over to you. Lessons
Sure.
learned.
Yeah, lots of lessons learned. I'll highlight a few. I think in no particular order. The first is, in order to do something like this, you really need a quality partnership. So I know that, you know, there are a lot of tools, a lot of things out there, and a lot of it's like, here it goes, good luck kind of thing. And I think, Caitlin, our journey has been the opposite of that. I think we have very long, extensive, you know, Plum calls and catch-ups and studies leading up to it, and continued, because for something like this, because it is so important, it's so critical in terms of, we've actually placed a high degree of importance on this being placed in a process that is changing people's lives, getting people jobs, that we need to make sure there's quality here. But to get there, you need a good partner, a real partner. So we've been very grateful to have Plum as a strong partner to us. Takeaway number two is access to data. If you are going to go down this path, having access to data and really being able to have people ready, on standby, ready to help support that effort is critical, because you're going to get a lot of great data from something like this, but you're also going to need to engage with your own data. And so it's really important to make sure that you're ready for that so that you can get the most from this experience. I agree with James's point. You get a lot of movement of management, and it is really important that managers continue to get educated on Plum so that you continue to have that buy-in and engagement. That might, of course, I think, Caitlin, you made this point, things change over time. A role may change, or a new manager comes in and says, I know that's what we were doing, but I want to hire this person for the future. That's cool, but let's talk about that, because if Plum's not looking for that person, all of a sudden we're having a conversation about why are these people not the person that I was looking for, right? So really, really important to make sure that they continue to get trained to get the buy-in. And lastly, I would say, if you are engaged in this process, you'll also learn a lot about your own interview processes and things that work and things that don't. One example I'll call out was assertiveness in interviews, right? Is how confident people came into their interviews, and whether or not that was a sign of their success. And one thing we saw was actually, as we studied the results we were getting, that wasn't actually a sign of someone who would be really successful, but an indicator of someone that people thought would be successful. And so, it really focused us to look inward, right? Reevaluate and determine, is that really an indicator of success? And we've since adjusted. And that's part of, Caitlin, as you talked about, that this isn't a set it and forget it type of thing. This is sort of an evolutionary tool that you can continue to use and continue to refine. So those are some of the lessons we've learned, and I'm sure we'll continue to learn as we continue to expand.
Fantastic. So last question, we've got about 5 minutes before we're going to go into Q&A. James, maybe you can start with, what's next? You've had a chance to use this over the last 2 years. Where do you see, if not right away, where's the hope in terms of evolving Plum in your organization?
Yeah, so much potential. So I boil it down to 3 areas, but they all fit under sort of breadth and depth. So one is, as I mentioned, we're using Plum in Canada for our entry points for campus, looking to take that global. So, where we have our campus hiring in many different countries. So that would be one piece in terms of the global breadth. In terms of the other uses is, we're not using it for experienced hires at the moment, but having conversations with different business units around that. So that's when we've got that mindset with those leaders and they want to use it for other areas. So that's one other piece. And then the other one is the broader talent life cycle. So, how do we look at, I mentioned some of the retention benefits we have, but we need to be looking at how do we not just use it at a talent assessment when someone comes into the bank, but bring this into their learning, their development. And of course, that involves me partnering with all of my other HR peers in different areas, but that's gonna, we've seen great success so far, and having those conversations is really exciting as we continue to want to sort of push the dial.
Awesome. Doug, how about you?
Yeah, very, very similar to James in terms of expansion. So beyond university recruiting, we also use it for our engineering organization today, and we have built a profile for one people leaders and one for individual contributors that we want to use for all senior manager and lower hires moving forward. And then we do also have an interest in sort of more of the outside of the TA space into the talent management space to really, explore the opportunity to really understand our internal talent more. So we have 20,000 salaried employees. As we look, the uncertainty in the environment, we seem to be, needing to pivot a lot faster. People, we're sort of pointing people in certain areas, moving people faster to kind of focus on the highest priority areas. So having an understanding of the talents, the capabilities, the skills of each and every one of our employees to give us the ability to then quickly adapt and resource the right opportunities with the best talent quickly is definitely top of mind. So I think moving forward, we'll be looking at that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Etienne.
Yeah, Caitlin, I would say Doug's last point is exactly what we're focused on is one, we have the expansion to other business lines at entry, but more importantly, how can we leverage these talent profiles? How can we leverage what we already know to be able to engage people over the longer term, have them find new careers, new opportunities? I mean, I think James said this about his, being an accountant and then moving into HR, like spending the first years at Bloomberg and moving into HR. There's something to say about that in terms of transferable skills internally, so that those moves can be easier. Plum, I feel like, can even take that another step and saying, allow people to be more proactive about identifying and connecting to the opportunities that either they're familiar with or ones that they're not, and sort of finding people new lives, new careers within a company, which we know is incredibly important for career development and sort of keeping an exciting career trajectory for employees.
Oh, that's great to hear. I mean, we designed Plum with the view of it not just helping to bring in the right talent, but how to retain the talent. And so the same data that matches somebody to a role is also able to help onboard that person, to help them with their professional development, have really engaging one-on-one conversations with their managers about how to best support them, how to understand what's draining them and maybe leading to burnout, and how to help support develop coping strategies, but then also look at internal mobility and be able to also identify leadership potential. So, a lot of assessments in this space only looked at director levels and above, and it would be a one-off assessment. In this case, since you already have the data on your new hire, you can start guiding whether or not they should be on a leadership path, maybe years before they're even ready for a leadership role. You can see that they have those foundational developments and foundational components, and then really be able to, improve the diversity of your talent pipeline, your succession planning or your leadership pipeline. So there's all the ways of using this data post-hire to really help improve that retention and to help find new pathways and strengthen your pipelining. So really happy to hear. We have a lot of other clients that are using it on the talent management side, and we can't wait to just keep growing and being able to use this across your organization. So we're going to open things up now. We're perfectly on time for some of the questions that have come in here. I'm going to also, while we get into the Q&A, I'm going to let people see that they can also complete their own Plum profile and see firsthand. We've unlocked that post-hire talent guide, which is that professional development guide. So again, it takes about 20-25 minutes. You can go in, you can start and stop it, come back later. If you have a couple of colleagues that you really want to have tried this as well, feel free to share it with them also. And then when you're done and you see your top 3 talents, don't forget to click on that talent guide and talent breakdown button, so you see all 10 of your talents and every behavior that drives and drains you. And we'd love you to be able to share it on LinkedIn, just like everybody else that completes it, and so that you can promote what makes you exceptional. And so feel free to grab that QR code or type into your browser, use.plum.io/NACE. And then I'm going to dive in and start asking the panel some different questions. So just giving me a second to...
I'll get started with the first one, and I'll let you pick the next one. Yeah. Are we able to see an example of the assignment the candidate did and how results are shown?
Yeah, so my suggestion is to reach out to help@plum.io, and we'll be happy to set you up with a demo and show you all those 3 steps and how people are matched, and how, the platform automatically is able to make it very intuitive, to understand how somebody is matched to the different role requirements. You can just go on our website as well, plum.io, and click request a demo, and happy to follow up and do that with people rather than taking up today's time.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you. Is Plum screen reader friendly /WCAG compliant?
That's one for me that I'll quickly answer. So the answer is yes, that it is screen reader friendly. We go above and beyond the WCAG compliant requirements, and in order to tailor to the individual needs of people that may request accommodations, we ask them to reach out to help@plum.io, and we work to set up the proper accommodations for their unique needs, because we want to make sure we're going above and beyond those regulations.
Thank you, Caitlin. How can a non-traditional student, such as an adult learner working full-time with a family or a military veteran benefit, as age bias is a huge barrier for hiring managers?
So does anybody from the panel maybe want to jump in to how they've seen this play out? James, you're off mute. Do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll comment. So although we're using it for early talent or campus, that talent can be, really we're saying there is, they might not have a lot of relevant experience. So what I would say is, that's a great sort of leveling of the playing field for Plum, is it's not looking at the technical skills. Yes, some of what we hire for, we do need technical assessments or to measure that. So that is important to us. But, what I would say more broadly around age bias, because this is a topic that we discuss quite a lot within my team, any bias or barrier, is the talent assessment is one key component of it, but then it's also everything you do around your broader talent strategy or inclusive hiring or leadership or inclusive leadership. So, when we're looking at age bias, for us, it will be what questions can you or can you not ask during an interview? What training are we providing our hiring managers on interviewing, but also what training are they getting in terms of broader DE&I training or psychological safety? So that's how I'd sort of encompass it in that. And then, you hope that you train up your interviewers and everyone in your organization so you don't get any hot water. But I think that, that's an evolution that we're all going through in terms of as the world continues to focus on inclusion.
Thank you, James. We'll move on. How would employers suggest career services effectively discuss other employers to expand their target student population they are recruiting? This goes back to the same EMPs recruiting the same pool of talent and then being disappointed when less than expected number of students accept offers. Baffling that doing same thing and expecting different results, particularly when so many more qualified candidates are out there.
So any ideas about how to do that internal change management of convincing, your own companies to do things differently and expanding that talent pool? Doug, you're off mute. Do you want to maybe go first?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that, and Caitlin, maybe you can kind of add too. The underlying principle around the Plum assessment is to cast a wide net. So related to the earlier question, what James is doing in terms of going resumeless, et cetera, all of those things, those are the things that create biases, right? Whether it's age, gender, URM status, et cetera, is forget about that. And, having a certain GPA or, where you went to school or, all of those sorts of things. This is about understanding your talents, your inherent strengths, your capabilities, what you bring to the table, and how that aligns to the requirements of the role within a particular organization, right? And that doesn't look at the typical factors that companies look at where they're really focused on in terms of biases around age, gender, et cetera. So Caitlin, I was thinking you may want to comment on kind of that whole kind of underpinning of the assessment and assessments that are focused on talents versus some of the other factors that we know, unfortunately, a lot of organizations use that actually do create bias.
Yeah, so as kind of mentioned earlier, there's an enormous amount of assessments that were created in World War II that just haven't stayed up to date with kind of best practices. So some of the things that industrial organizational psychology have learned is that, assessments that test for language or math tend to discriminate against certain socioeconomic groups. So when we are testing for cognitive ability, which is embedded in that single assessment, we're not looking at past learned knowledge. We're actually looking at something called fluid intelligence, which is basically somebody's ability to solve brand new problems. So, which is relevant to work in terms of, we're constantly, jobs are ever evolving, and we really want to know how capable somebody is solving something brand new that they've never experienced before. And so we get at that through looking at solving visual puzzles. We're looking at personality based on what's the gold standard of personality, which is the Big Five or 5-factor model. And we do it in a way that you can't fake or game. So there's lots of assessments out there that say from 1 to 10, how good are you at something? And lots of the times people are like, oh, I'm an 8, I'm a 9, I'm a 10. They always want to look good to employers, but this isn't about a right or wrong answer. This is about how does somebody prioritize their time, what's most like them and least like them. There's no right or wrong answer. and they're being not just compared to one role, but hundreds of potentially different roles. And so in this case, we make sure that they can't fake or game that personality component, and it's based on best practices. And then the last part as well is that we look at social intelligence. So how well do they solve people problems? How well, if there's a conflict at work, what's the best way to respond to get the best out of people versus the worst way to respond to that's not going to get the best out of people. And that collectively is helping us quantify 10 talents like innovation, communication, execution, conflict resolution, and really looking at how the person is prioritizing. We only have so many hours in a day. What are we ideally going to spend the best amount of time on that we're going to perform at our highest, we're going to be the most happy and fulfilled with? And in an ideal world, what would you delegate to somebody else? Or at least develop coping strategies if you have to deal with those activities on a daily basis, so they become less draining and less likely to lead to burnout. So really about taking those best practices, but also figuring out how to scale it so that we can use this. The idea still is about, if you were to just stay with traditional process of just accepting resumes and nothing else, often we're not looking at people that have those transferable soft skills. And so this is an opportunity to screen in people and surface them to the top of the pile where they may not have been considered before. Just a few days ago, there was a TikTok video released by somebody that applied to Scotiabank. And they talked about how, as an arts background, they had a dream of applying to commercial banking, but anytime they applied, they never got a single interview. And they were able to do a co-op term at Scotiabank, be screened in because of their Plum profile. And now, having had 6 months of experience on the job, they're getting job offers from Goldman Sachs and all the other commercial banking organizations. And this was their opportunity to get their foot in the door and to really level the playing field. And that's what is the point of this. And so I think when you talk to your employer, it's about explaining the opportunity to go after talent that your competition probably isn't going after, and really having an impact to create a positive experience on these candidates. So I know the next question here is how many clients are currently using the Plum assessment. So we have over 100 clients, and we have the majority of them are split evenly between Canada and the US. And then we have about 10 to 15% that are headquartered outside of North America. However, a lot of our brands, like the ones on this call, aren't just using us in their Canadian or US headquarters. They have global deployments. And so we're active in over 26 countries globally. And so if we looked at exactly the portion, we have just as many candidates coming in globally as we do coming in through Canada and the US. And then I know we are pretty much almost at time, so we'll quickly get through these next questions. Do you want to ask the next ones here?
I don't know if you talked about this, but do you see Plum being a starting site for candidates to go and see where their skills align with positions?
So maybe James, you can talk about, you talked about it a little before, but how they're able to be matched to more than just the one role they applied to.
Yeah, so for the person that asked that question, I'd say absolutely. This is opening up conversations with, individuals for their self-awareness, but also with their coaches, their mentors, their managers. We have big brands represented on the call today. So we have various different opportunities, and Etienne was talking about starting in the business in Bloomberg and moving into HR. So yeah, definitely this will be something continuing to grow for us. And then when we get to sort of that common language, as Caitlin was saying, when someone does a Plum profile, it can be used for multiple different organizations. So, for us, looking at how do we continue to grow those cultural markers or those terminology pieces that will just become common language for us over time.
Perfect. Thank you. And then last question.
My understanding is that employers determine which factors to measure based on the job that they are hiring for. Is there any support provided for employers to assist them in choosing the best measures? And you can all give closing thoughts after this one. Thank you.
Maybe you can answer it. Duke, let's move to your closing thoughts, and if you have any comments about this. So Etienne, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. With respect to this, I think the support that we've enjoyed, it kind of goes back to that partnership, because we may have an understanding of what we're looking for, and as you go through this exercise, some things are gonna line up and other things may not. And I think what we've learned is that that support comes through the engagement, through the education around Plum. And so that has been sort of the greatest takeaway for us, is just really being educated on how those skills tie to what we think success looks like. And so is there support? Yes, absolutely. And sometimes it makes us think about how we advertise things and how we look and what skills we're looking for. But fundamentally, that makes us sharper, and that makes it a bit more clear for the people we're looking for. So, I think from a closing standpoint, we have absolutely enjoyed the partnership we've had with Plum. It has allowed us to be a bit more flexible in our hiring, be more thoughtful about our hiring. And I think we're sort of getting to that stage where we're really ready to elevate. And again, think about the longer term implications of how we can find that next opportunity for employees to do, as Doug said earlier, right? Having people not necessarily fit, but stay, which I think is really critical.
Great. So closing remarks, James, and then we'll get to Doug.
Sure, I'll be very short. All I would say to the audience is this is the future of work. We're already here. We talk about that as some kind of topic that we hear a lot about, but this is what it is. And I think, the tie into sort of the past couple of years that we've all been through is the looking at hard skills, soft skills. I call the soft skills the hard stuff, or the power skills. This aligns perfectly to that in terms of what we're looking for, in terms of those things, as Caitlin has said, what's going to really thrive, what's going to make you thrive in a role, what's going to drain you or lead to burnout. These are topics that I know we're all having, regardless of the role that we play. So those would just be my final comments. And I think, this is where recruitment, from the role I have, this is where it's going. So, it's not going to slow down, I think.
Perfect. And Doug, last words.
Yeah, just sort of final, completely agree. Kind of this intersection of science and technology is what's most exciting for me. And then I guess just sort of finally, university recruiting is a key part of our strategy. I mean, it is, and it will be in the future. So the people that we hire into these programs that we have are the future leaders at Whirlpool Corporation. So that's why I'm so focused on this. It's because it's so important. We want to hire people that are going to have great careers at Whirlpool. We want to have people that are going to be able to showcase their strengths and their true talents at our company. That's what this is all about at the end of the day. And I just wanted to, thank you all for joining.
Thank you. And now I'll turn it back to Nace to close out the session.
Thank you, panelists and Plum, for a very informative session. And thank you, participants, for attending today's webinar. This officially concludes the webinar, and you may now sign off.
Thank you.